In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a young wife, Clara, is fading under her charming husband Harold's grip, and only Miss Marple sees the danger. Haunted by a past failure where she couldn't save another woman from a scheming husband, Miss Marple vows to act. With Clara's life on the line, poisoned by Harold's medicine and trapped by his lies, she sets a clever trap, using village gossip and her sharp mind to unravel his deadly plan. Will she outsmart Harold in time to save Clara and find justice, or will her past repeat itself? Join Miss Marple in a thrilling tale of courage and cunning, where a small village hides big secrets, and one old woman changes everything. Chapter 1. The Uneasy Feeling. The sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking gently. The roses outside her cottage glowed in the evening light, but her sharp eyes weren't on them. They were on the street, where people strolled after supper, chatting and laughing. St. Mary Mead was a quiet place, full of familiar faces, but tonight, something felt off. Miss Marple couldn't quite say what. It was a feeling, like a shadow creeping over her heart. She put down her knitting and sipped her tea, now cold. Her mind wandered 2 years ago, a winter night, when a woman's smile hid fear, and Miss Marple hadn't acted fast enough. That memory stung, even now. She shook her head, trying to focus on the present. Tonight was special. A gathering at the vicarage. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, had invited half the village for tea and gossip. Miss Marple wasn't one for gossip, but she liked listening. People's words often hid truths, and she had a knack for spotting them. She stood, smoothed her black dress, and picked up her shawl. The air was cool as she stepped outside, locking her cottage door. The vicarage wasn't far, just past the church and the little shop. As she walked, her stick tapping the path, she noticed the usual faces: Mr. Brown sweeping his porch, young Tommy chasing his dog, and Mrs. Price from the inn, hurrying somewhere with a worried look. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Price always seemed rushed lately, ever since those new guests arrived. At the vicarage, the parlor was warm and crowded. Lamps glowed, and the smell of scones filled the air. Mrs. Clement bustled about, offering tea and cakes. Miss Marple found a seat near the fireplace, her back straight, her hands folded. She smiled politely as people greeted her, but her mind was alert, taking in every word, every glance. That's when she saw her Mrs. Eleanor Price, not the innkeeper's wife, but a visitor, a young woman with bright eyes and a nervous smile. Eleanor sat across the room, next to a man with slick hair and a charming grin. They were new in St. Mary Mead, staying at the inn for a week. Eleanor had introduced herself earlier, saying she was here with her friend Clara and Clara's husband, Harold Trent. Miss Marple watched them. Clara, a pale woman with soft brown hair, clung to Harold's arm. He was tall, with a smooth voice that carried over the chatter. He told a funny story about a lost hat, and everyone laughed, but Clara's laugh was too quick, too sharp. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her shawl. Something about Clara reminded her of that winter night long ago, a woman who smiled but wasn't happy. Harold's hand rested on Clara's, but it looked more like a grip than a comfort. Miss Marple's heart beat faster. She didn't like it. Mrs. Clement came over, her face pink from hosting. "Jane, you're quiet tonight. Have another scone." She held out a plate, but Miss Marple shook her head. "Thank you, Dolly, but I'm fine." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Who are those new folks?" "The Trents and Mrs. Price." Mrs. Clement glanced over, eager to share. "Oh, they're from London, I think. Clara and Harold just got married, and Eleanor's their friend, staying at the inn for a holiday. Harold's ever so charming, don't you think? Always telling stories." Miss Marple nodded, but her eyes stayed on Clara. "She seems quiet. Is she well?" Mrs. Clement shrugged. "She's shy, I suppose. Harold says she's been tired lately. Travel, you know." "Tired," Miss Marple repeated softly. That word stuck in her mind. Tired could mean many things. Tired from a long trip, or tired from something heavier, something hidden. She remembered another woman who'd been tired, pale, nervous, with a husband too charming for his own good. That woman hadn't lived to see spring. Miss Marple pushed the memory away, but it clung like damp fog. Eleanor stood and crossed the room, her blue dress swishing. She stopped near Miss Marple, offering a shy smile. "Miss Marple, isn't it? I've heard you're quite the clever one." Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes warm but sharp. "Oh, I'm just an old woman who likes to listen." "You're Mrs. Price." "Yes. How do you like St. Mary Mead?" "It's lovely," Eleanor said, sitting beside her. "So peaceful." Clara needed a break. "You see, she's been not herself." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Not herself? How so?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Clara and Harold. Harold was laughing with the vicar, but his eyes flicked toward them. Eleanor lowered her voice. "She's been quiet, jumpy. I thought a holiday would help, but—" She trailed off, twisting her hands. Miss Marple patted Eleanor's arm. "Holidays don't always fix everything, my dear. Sometimes they show what's wrong." She kept her voice light, but her mind was racing. Eleanor's worry felt real, not just idle chatter. Something was off, and Miss Marple couldn't ignore it. The evening went on, with more tea and talk. Harold told another story, his voice loud and smooth. Clara smiled beside him, but her eyes were dull, like a candle about to flicker out. Miss Marple watched, her knitting forgotten, in her lap. She noticed how Harold always spoke for Clara, how he touched her arm when she tried to speak, how her smile faded when he wasn't looking. It was a pattern, one Miss Marple knew too well. As the guests began to leave, Miss Marple stayed, pretending to help Mrs. Clement tidy up. Really, she wanted to watch the Trents. Harold helped Clara into her coat, his hand firm on her shoulder. Eleanor followed, her face tight with worry. Miss Marple's heart sank. She'd seen this before. Woman trapped, a man too charming, and no proof to act on. Last time, she'd waited too long. Not this time, she thought. Back home, Miss Marple lit a lamp and sat by her fire. The cottage was quiet, but her mind was loud. She thought of Clara's pale face, Eleanor's nervous words, and Harold's too perfect smile. She remembered that winter night, the woman who died because Miss Marple hadn't trusted her instincts enough. The memory was heavy, like a stone in her chest. She couldn't let it happen again. She pulled out her notebook, a small thing she kept for thoughts. Her pen scratched as she wrote. Clara Trent, pale, nervous. Harold Trent, charming, controlling. Eleanor Price, worried friend. Check Harold's past. Watch Clara closely. She paused, then added, "Don't wait too long." The clock ticked past 9. Miss Marple closed her notebook and stared into the fire. St. Mary Mead was full of stories, and she knew them all: lovers' quarrels, petty thefts, old grudges. But this was different. This was a shadow, like the one from years ago. She thought of a girl in the village, years back, who'd married a man too smooth, too kind. Everyone loved him, but Miss Marple had seen the truth in his eyes. By the time she spoke up, it was too late. That failure haunted her, waking her at night with what ifs. Clara wasn't that girl, but she could be. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her pen. She'd start tomorrow, quietly. She'd talk to Eleanor, maybe visit the inn. She'd watch Harold, note his habits. She'd seen men like him before, charming on the outside, cold inside. In St. Mary Mead, secrets never stayed hidden long. People talked, and Miss Marple listened. She stood, her knees creaking, and put her notebook away. The fire was dying, but her resolve wasn't. She'd made a mistake once, letting doubt stop her. Not again. Clara's pale face was a warning, and Miss Marple wouldn't ignore it. She'd find the truth, whatever it took. As she climbed the stairs to bed, the village was silent outside. But in her mind, she heard that woman's voice from years ago, soft and scared. She saw Clara's eyes, dim and tired. Miss Marple's lips pressed tight. This time, she'd be ready. This time, she'd act. The next morning, Miss Marple woke early. The sun was barely up, but she was already dressed, her shawl around her shoulders. She made tea and sat by the window, watching the village wake. A boy delivered papers, and Mrs. Brown swept her steps. Everything looked normal, but Miss Marple knew better. Trouble didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled, like Harold Trent. She thought of Eleanor's words. Clara's not herself. That was the key. Clara was scared, and Harold was the reason. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sharp. She'd start at the inn, maybe chat with Mrs. Price, the innkeeper's wife. She'd ask about the Trents, casual like people talked when you listened, and Miss Marple was very good at listening. She finished her tea and stood. Her stick tapped the floor as she moved to the door. The day was bright, but that uneasy feeling lingered. She'd felt it before, and it had been right. This case, she knew, would stay with her. It already had a hold on her heart, pulling her back to that winter night she couldn't forget. But this time, she'd change the ending. This time, she'd make sure Clara was safe. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. Miss Marple woke with the dawn, her mind already turning over the puzzle of Clara Trent. The cottage was quiet, save for the soft chirp of birds outside. She made tea, her hand steady despite the unease in her chest. Clara's pale face from the vicarage lingered in her thoughts, like a ghost from that old winter night. She couldn't shake the memory of another woman, years ago, whose smile hid fear. That woman's fate had left a scar on Miss Marple's heart, and Clara's nervous eyes felt like a warning she couldn't ignore. She dressed in her usual black, pinned her hat, and took her stick. The inn wasn't far, just past the church and the shop. The morning air was crisp, and St. Mary Mead stirred slowly. Milk bottles clinked, and Tommy's dog yapped in the distance. Miss Marple's steps were slow but sure, her sharp eyes scanning the village. She noticed Mrs. Price, the innkeeper's wife, hanging linens outside. A good chance to talk, she thought. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple called, her voice warm but curious. Mrs. Price looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple, early for a walk, aren't you?" "Just stretching my legs," Miss Marple said, smiling. "How are your guests settling in?" "The Trents and Mrs. Price, the younger one." Mrs. Price's face tightened, just for a moment. "They're fine, I suppose. Mr. Trent's a talker. Always charming the maids. Mrs. Trent Clarashi keeps to herself, hardly leaves her room." Miss Marple nodded, her mind catching on. "Hardly leaves her room. Is she unwell?" Mrs. Price shrugged, pinning a sheet. "She says it's nerves. Mr. Trent says she's delicate, needs rest," but she hesitated, glancing around. "She looks scared, Miss Marple, pale as milk, and her hands shake when he's not near." Miss Marple's heart sank. It was the same pattern charm, hiding control. A wife fading under her husband's shadow. She thanked Mrs. Price and moved on, her stick tapping the path. At the inn's garden, she saw Clara sitting alone on a bench, a shawl around her shoulders. Harold was nowhere in sight. Perfect, Miss Marple thought. She approached slowly, her smile gentle. "Mrs. Trent, may I join you? Such a lovely morning." Clara started, her eyes wide, but she nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple." Miss Marple sat, folding her hands. Clara's face was pale, her fingers twisting the shawl's fringe. "Ah, you enjoying St. Mary Mead?" Miss Marple asked, keeping her tone light. "It's quiet," Clara said, her voice soft. "Harold likes it. Says it's good for me. And is it?" Miss Marple's eyes were kind but sharp, watching Clara's face. Clara looked away, her lips trembling. "I suppose I've been tired. Harold says it's the city air, but—" She stopped, her hands stilling. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft. "Sometimes, my dear, it's not the air. It's the heart. Is something troubling you?" Clara's eyes flicked to the inn, then back. "No, it's nothing. Harold takes care of me. He's so kind." But her voice cracked, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Miss Marple patted her hand. "Kindness can look many ways. If you ever need a friend, I'm just down the lane." She stood, not pushing further. Clara needed trust, not pressure. As she walked back, Miss Marple's mind worked fast. Clara's fear was real, and Harold's kindness felt like a mask. She remembered a village man, years back, who'd been all smiles, while his wife grew quiet, then sick. Everyone thought it was illness, and it wasn't. Miss Marple hadn't acted then, not until it was too late. The guilt still stung. She wouldn't wait this time. Back home, she found a letter from Sir Henry Clithering, her old friend from the police. He was visiting nearby and promised to stop by. Good, she thought. Sir Henry could dig into Harold's past. She wrote a quick note, asking him to check on Harold Trentini, old marriages, money troubles, or sudden death. She sealed it and gave it to the postboy, her heart steady but heavy. By afternoon, Miss Marple was back at the vicarage, helping Mrs. Clement sort hymn books. Really, she was listening. The village buzzed with talk about the Trents. Harold had charmed the baker, the postman, everyone. Such a nice man, they said. But Miss Marple knew charm could hide poison. She'd seen it before. At the vicarage, Eleanor Price appeared, her face pale. "Miss Marple, can we talk?" she whispered, pulling her aside. "Of course, dear." Miss Marple led her to a quiet corner. Eleanor's hands shook, her eyes darting to the door. "It's Clara," Eleanor said, her voice low. "She's worse. She won't eat, says her stomach hurts. Harold says it's nerves, but I don't believe him. She's scared. Miss Marple, I saw her hide a letter yesterday, like she didn't want him to know." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "A letter, to whom I don't know. She burned it after, but she looked so frightened." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I should have stayed with her today, but Harold insisted I come here." Miss Marple squeezed her hand. "You've done right, telling me. Keep close to her, Eleanor. And don't let Harold know you're worried." Eleanor nodded, wiping her eyes. As she left, Miss Marple's mind raced. A hidden letter, stomach pains, fear. It was a pattern, one she'd missed once before. She thought of that village woman again, whose illness had been poison, slipped into her tea. The husband had been charming, too, until the truth came out. Miss Marple's lips pressed tight. She needed proof, and fast. That evening, she walked to the inn again, pretending to visit Mrs. Price about a church raffle. Really, she watched Harold. He was in the lounge, laughing with guests, his voice loud and smooth. Clara sat beside him, silent, her hands folded. When Harold touched her arm, she flinched, just slightly. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. That flinch said more than words. She lingered, chatting with Mrs. Price about nothing, her eyes on the Trents. Harold ordered tea for Clara, insisting she drink it. "For your nerves, darling," he said, his smile wide. Clara sipped, her hands shaking. Miss Marple's heart thudded. Was it just tea? She couldn't be sure. Not yet. As she left, the innkeeper's wife followed her to the door. "Miss Marple, you see it too, don't you?" Mrs. Price whispered. "Something's wrong with that girl." Miss Marple nodded, her face grim. "Keep an eye on her, please, and save any cups she uses, just in case." Mrs. Price's eyes widened, but she nodded. Miss Marple walked home, the night air cold. Her mind churned with memories. Another woman, another charming husband, another failure. Clara's pale face was a mirror to that past. But this time, Miss Marple wouldn't wait. She'd watch, listen, and act. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and opened her notebook. Her pen scratched. Clara, ill, scared. Hidden letter. Harold, to watchful. Check teacups. Wait for Sir Henry's news. She closed the book, her resolve hard as stone. The shadows of suspicion were growing, and she'd follow them, no matter where they led. Clara's life might depend on it. Chapter 3. The Village Parallel. Miss Marple sat by her cottage window, the morning light soft on her face. Her tea steamed, but her thoughts were cold, fixed on Clara Trent's pale eyes and Harold's too smooth smile. The unease from yesterday clung to her, heavy as the mist outside. She'd seen fear like Clara's before, in a village woman named Mary, years ago. Mary's husband, John, had been all charm, but his eyes were hard, and Mary grew quiet, then sick, then gone. Miss Marple hadn't acted fast enough then. The guilt still burned, and Clara's face was a mirror to that old pain. She set her cup down, her mind sharp. Yesterday's talk with Eleanor and the innkeeper's wife had confirmed her fears. Clara was scared. maybe sick, and Harold was the cause. That hidden letter, the trembling hands, the tea Harold insisted she drink it, all pointed to danger. Miss Marple needed proof, but proof took time, and time was slipping away. A knock broke her thoughts. It was the postboy, with a letter from Sir Henry Clythering. She tore it open, her eyes scanning his neat script. Harold Trent had a past debts in London, a first wife who'd died suddenly, her money gone to him. No proof of foul play, but Sir Henry's words were grim. Watch him, Jane, he's slippery. Miss Marple's lips pressed tight. Slippery was right. Men like Harold hid their tracks well. She tucked the letter away and stood, pinning her hat. Today, she'd dig deeper. St. Mary Mead held answers people talked, and she knew how to listen. She'd start with the shop, where tongues wagged over bread and stamps. Her stick tapped the path as she walked, the village waking around her. Mr. Brown nodded from his porch, and young Tommy waved, his dog at his heels. Everything seemed normal, but Miss Marple felt the shadow growing at the shop. Mrs. Wicks was behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour. "Morning, Miss Marple," she said, slicing bread. "What'll it be?" "Just a loaf, please," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. She leaned closer, her voice casual. "Those new folks at the inn, the Trent seem nice, don't they?" Mrs. Wicks snorted, wrapping the loaf. "Him, maybe, all charm and big stories. But her, quiet as a mouse, looks ill, if you ask me. My sister saw her at the inn, hands shaking like leaves." Miss Marple nodded, her heart sinking. "Ill, you say? Poor thing." "Aye," Mrs. Wicks said, lowering her voice. "And that, Harold's always hovering, like he's afraid she'll speak. Reminds me of John Carter, years back. You remember him?" Miss Marple's breath caught. "John Carter, Mary's husband." "I do," she said softly. "A sad story." Mrs. Wicks leaned in, her eyes bright with gossip. "Sad, indeed. John was all smiles, but Mary wasted away. Folks said it was her heart, but I always wondered. He left quick after, didn't he?" Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her stick. The parallel was stark. John's charm, Mary's fear, her sudden death. Now Harold and Clara, the same pattern. She thanked Mrs. Wicks and left, her mind racing. The village remembered Mary's story, and it was whispering about Clara. Miss Marple knew whispers could lead to truth. She headed to the church, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers. The vicar's wife loved to chat, and she'd seen the Trents at the vicarage. Miss Marple found her by the altar, fussing with roses. "Dolly, you're making it lovely," she said, easing into a pew. Mrs. Clement beamed. "Oh, Jane, you're kind. Care to help?" Miss Marple picked up a stem, her eyes gentle but sharp. "I saw Mrs. Trent at the inn yesterday," she said casually. She looked tired. "Has she been to church?" Mrs. Clement frowned, clipping a leaf. "No, not once. Harold says she's frail, needs rest. But Eleanor Price was here, praying up a storm." "Looked worried sick." "Worried?" Miss Marple asked, her voice soft. Mrs. Clement nodded, glancing around. "She didn't say much, but I heard her whisper Clara's name. Something's not right, Jane. You've a knack for spotting trouble. What do you think?" Miss Marple hesitated, then said, "I think Clara needs a friend, and Harold will. Charming men aren't always kind." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened, but she nodded. Miss Marple left soon after, her mind heavy. Eleanor's prayers, Clara's absence, Harold's control. It was all too familiar. She thought of Mary Carter, how the village had loved John until it was too late. St. Mary Mead saw patterns, even if it didn't know it. Back home, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Harold, debts, dead wife, Clara, ill, scared. Village sees it John and Mary again. Check TI, talk to Eleanor." She paused, her pen hovering. The parallel to Mary's story was clear, but Clara was still alive. There was time, if she moved fast. A knock came. Eleanor Price, her face pale, her eyes red. "Miss Marple, I'm sorry to barge in," she said, twisting her hands. "It's Clara. She's worse. She won't leave her room. Says her head hurts. Harold gave her." Medicine. But she looked so weak. Miss Marple's heart thudded. Medicine. Like John's tonics for Mary. Did you see the medicine? She asked, her voice calm. Eleanor shook her head. He keeps it locked in his case. But Clara's eyes, they're dull. Like she's fading. I'm scared. Miss Marple? Miss Marple took her hand, her mind racing. You're right to come. Go back. Stay with her. Don't let Harold know you're watching. I'll come to the inn tonight. Eleanor nodded, her face set. As she left, Miss Marple's resolve hardened. She thought of Mary, how she'd waited for proof while Mary slipped away. Not this time. She'd act even without proof. That evening, she walked to the inn, her shawl tight against the chill. The lounge was warm, full of chatter, but Miss Marple's eyes found Clara at once. She sat by Harold, her face white, a cup in her hands. Harold was talking, his laugh loud, but his hand rested on Clara's arm, firm and still. Miss Marple's stomach twisted. She remembered John Carter's hand on Mary, the same grip dressed as love. She approached, her smile sweet. Mr. Trent, Mrs. Trent, how nice to see you, she said, sitting nearby. Harold's smile was wide, but his eyes were cold. Miss Marple, a pleasure, he said, his voice smooth. Clara's feeling poorly, but the country air's helping. Clara nodded, her lips barely moving. Yes, better, she whispered, but her hand shook, and the cup clinked against the saucer. Miss Marple chatted lightly, her eyes on the cup. When Clara set it down, half full, Miss Marple noted its place. She'd ask Mrs. Price to save it later. She watched Harold, to his quick glances at Clara, his hand never leaving her. It was control, not care. She'd seen it in John, and it had ended in a grave dot as she left. She stopped by the innkeeper's wife. That cup Clara used, she whispered. Keep it safe, unwashed, and watch her, please. Mrs. Price nodded, her face grim. Miss Marple walked home, the night dark around her. The village parallel was clear. John and Mary, Harold and Clara. But Clara still breathed, and Miss Marple would keep it that way. She'd write to Sir Henry again, push for more on Harold's past. She'd watch, listen, and wait for the moment to act. In her cottage, she opened her notebook, her pen steady. Clara fading, medicine locked. Harold like John Carter. Village. Seize it. Get cup. Push Sir Henry. She closed the book, her heart heavy but firm. The shadows were closing in, but she'd face them. For Clara, and for Mary, she'd find the truth. Chapter 4. A cry for help. The morning sun crept through Miss Marple's curtains, but her heart was heavy with the shadows of last night. Clara Trent's trembling hands and Harold's cold eyes haunted her dreams, mixing with memories of Mary Carter, whose life slipped away under a charming husband's grip. Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table, her tea untouched, her notebook open. The village parallel was stark. Clara was fading, just like Mary had, and Harold's control was tightening. The cup she'd asked Mrs. Price to save might hold answers, but proof was still out of reach, and time was short. She dressed quickly, her black dress and shawl familiar as armor. Sir Henry's letter about Harold's past debts, a dead wife, no proof of crime lay on her desk, a warning she couldn't ignore. Today, she'd push harder. Clara's fear was a cry for help, even if she couldn't voice it. Miss Marple grabbed her stick and stepped outside. The village quiet under a gray sky. St. Mary Mead felt watchful, as if it knew trouble was brewing. Her first stop was the inn. Mrs. Price, the innkeeper's wife, was sweeping the porch, her face tight. Miss Marple, she whispered, glancing around. I saved that cup, like you said. It's in the kitchen, unwashed. But Clarucci didn't come down for breakfast. Harold said she's resting. Miss Marple's heart sank. Resting, she repeated, the word bitter. Did you see her? Mrs. Price shook her head. He wouldn't let me, said she needs quiet. But Eleanor was there, looking like she'd cried all night. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Clara locked away. Eleanor, scared it, was the same pattern as Mary, shut off from help until it was too late. Keep that cup safe, she said. And if you see Clara, tell her I'll visit soon. She moved on, her stick tapping the path, her eyes scanning the village. At the post office, she sent a wire to Sir Henry, urgent. More on Harold Trent. Any police records? Check wife's death. She couldn't wait for his reply. She'd act now, proof or not. Clara's life hung on it. Back home, she was barely through the door when a knock came. Eleanor Price stood there, her face pale, her hands twisted in her scarf. "Miss Marple, I need your help," she said, her voice breaking. "Clara's worse. She can't keep food down, and her eyes there. So tired. I'm afraid she's dying." Miss Marple ushered her inside, her heart thudding. "Sit, dear, tell me everything." Eleanor sank into the chair, her words tumbling out. "Last night, after you left, Harold gave Clara another dose of that medicine." She gagged, but he made her swallow it. "This morning, she was too weak to stand. I tried to stay, but he sent me out, said I was upsetting her. But she grabbed my hand. 'Miss Marple,' she whispered, 'don't leave me. She's terrified of him.'" Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her stick. It was Mary's story, all over again. Medicine, weakness, fear. "Did you see the bottle?" she asked. "No, he keeps it locked in his bag," Eleanor said, tears spilling. "But I found something yesterday." Clara dropped her handkerchief. Inside was a tiny paper, like from a powder packet. "I kept it, but I don't know what it is." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Show me." Eleanor pulled a folded handkerchief from her pocket, revealing a scrap of paper, crinkled and dusted with white grains. Miss Marple's heart raced. Poison. She couldn't be sure, but it was a clue, more than she'd had with Mary. "Well done, Eleanor. Keep this safe, and don't tell Harold. Can you get me into Clara's room?" Eleanor nodded, wiping her eyes. "He's at the pub now, charming everyone. I'll take you." Miss Marple grabbed her shawl, her resolve hard as stone. They hurried to the inn, slipping in through the side door. Mrs. Price met them, her face grim. "He's still out," she whispered. "Clara's upstairs, room 6. They climbed the narrow stairs, Miss Marple's stick steady despite her racing heart. At Clara's door, Eleanor knocked softly. "Clara, it's me." And Miss Marple, a faint voice, answered, "Come in." The room was dim, curtains drawn. Clara lay in bed, her face white as the sheets, her eyes dull. She tried to sit up, but sank back, her hands shaking. "Eleanor," she whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." Miss Marple sat beside her, her voice gentle. "Clara, my dear, we're worried about you. Can you tell me what's wrong?" Clara's eyes flicked to the door, fear flashing. "It's nothing. I'm just tired. Harold says it's my nerves." Miss Marple took her hand, feeling its cold tremble. "Sometimes nerves are a warning. Has Harold given you medicine?" Clara nodded, her lips trembling. "Every day. It tastes bitter, makes me sick, but he says it's for my health." Miss Marple's heart clenched. Bitter medicine, sickness. It was too close to Mary's story. "Clara, do you trust him?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I did, at first. He was so kind, but now, I'm scared. He watches me, always. Last week, I found my jewelry gone, and he said I lost it, but I didn't. And my will, he asked me to change it to him. I said no, and he got so angry." Miss Marple's mind whirred. Missing jewelry, a will. Harold was building a trap, just like John Carter had. "Have you told anyone else?" she asked. Clara shook her head. "I tried writing to my brother, but Harold found the letter. He burned it, said I was confused." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to do." Miss Marple squeezed her hand, her voice firm but kind. "You've done right, telling me. We'll help you, but you must be brave. Don't take that medicine again. Spill it if you can." Clara nodded, a spark of hope in her eyes. Eleanor hovered, her face fierce. "I'll stay with her," she said. "He won't touch her." Miss Marple stood, her mind clear. Clara's cry for help was loud now, and she wouldn't fail her like she'd failed Mary. "Eleanor, keep her safe. I'll be back tonight. If Harold tries anything, call Mrs. Price." They left Clara resting, her face less pale with hope. Downstairs, Miss Marple spoke to Mrs. Price. "That cup, send it to Dr. Haydock. Ask him to test it, and watch Harold. He's dangerous." Mrs. Price nodded, her eyes wide. Miss Marple walked home, the sky heavy with clouds. Clara's words echoed missing jewelry, A burned letter. Bitter medicine. It was a plan. Cold and cruel. She thought of Mary, how John had stolen her money, her life, while the village smiled. Harold was the same, but Clara was still here, and Miss Marple would keep her that way. At home, she opened her notebook, her pen scratching. Clara sick, scared, medicine bitter, jewelry gone, will pressured, paper with powder tested, cup to Haydock, protect Clara. She paused, her heart heavy. The cry for help was clear, but proof was thin. The cup, the powder, they might show poison, but not yet. Sir Henry's reply might bring more, but she couldn't wait. She thought of the village, how it saw John Carter's charm, but missed Mary's fear. Now it saw Harold's smile, but Clara's fading was plain to those who looked. Mrs. Wicks, Mrs. Clement, Mrs. Price, they all saw it, even if they didn't know what it meant. St. Mary Mead was watching, and Miss Marple was its eyes. That night, she'd return to the inn, check on Clara, and watch Harold. She'd talk to Dr. Haydock, push for tests. She'd write Sir Henry again, demand answers. The parallel to Mary's tragedy was stark, but this story would end differently. Clara's cry had reached her, and Miss Marple wouldn't let it fade. She closed her notebook, her resolve like iron. The shadows were deep, but she'd face them. For Clara, for Mary, for the truth, she'd fight on. Chapter 5. The trap is set. Miss Marple's cottage was quiet, the fire low, but her mind blazed with purpose. Clara's whispered fears from yesterday, bitter medicine, missing jewelry, a burned letter echoed like a bell. The parallel to Mary Carter's tragedy was sharp, but Clara still breathed, and Miss Marple would keep it that way. The cup from the inn was with Dr. Haydock now, being tested, and Eleanor's scrap of paper with white powder sat hidden in Miss Marple's drawer, waiting for answers. Sir Henry's wire hadn't come yet, but she couldn't wait. Harold Trent's charm was a mask, and she'd tear it off. She sipped her morning tea, her notebook open, her pen scratched. Clara weak, terrified. Harold controls medicine, money, cup testing, powder saved, need proof fast. The village was stirring, outside milk bottles clinked. Tommy's dog barked, but Miss Marple's focus was on the inn, where Clara lay trapped. She thought of Mary, how John Carter's smile fooled everyone until it was too late. Harold was cleverer, but not clever enough. A knock came. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, stood at the door, her face flushed. "Jane, you're up early. I heard Clara Trent's poorly again. Eleanor's in a state. Says Harold won't let anyone near her." Miss Marple's heart tightened. "Thank you, Dolly. I'll go to the inn. Keep an ear out, will you? Harold's too smooth for my liking." Mrs. Clement nodded, her eyes wide. "He reminds me of John Carter, you know. All charm, but something cold underneath." Miss Marple's lips pressed thin. The village saw it too, even if they didn't understand. She grabbed her shawl and stick, her plan forming. She'd set a trap for Harold, something to make him slip. Clara's talk of her will, how Harold pushed her to change, it gave her an idea. If he thought Clara's money was slipping away, he might act rashly, show his hand at the inn. Mrs. Price met her in the kitchen, her face grim. "Dr. Haydock's testing the cup," Miss Marple said. "It'll take a day. Clara's upstairs, weaker than ever. Harold's with her, all smiles, but I don't trust him." Miss Marple nodded. "Nor do I. Can you get Eleanor down here?" Quietly. Mrs. Price hurried off, returning with Eleanor, whose eyes were red from crying. "Miss Marple, Clara's barely awake," Eleanor whispered. "Harold gave her more medicine this morning. I tried to stop him, but he pushed me out." Miss Marple's heart thudded. Time was running out. "Eleanor, listen carefully. We need to make Harold think Clara's changing her will, leaving her money to a charity, not him. If he's after her fortune, he'll panic. Can you play along?" Eleanor's face hardened. "Anything to save her." Miss Marple outlined her plan. Eleanor would tell Harold, casually, that Clara had spoken to a lawyer about her will, wanting to give her money to a children's home. Miss Marple would spread the same story in the village, letting it reach Harold's ears. If he was poisoning Clara for her money, he'd act, maybe slip up, give them proof. She'd ask Dr. Haydock to watch Clara's health, ready to step in if she worsened. Eleanor nodded, her jaw set. I'll do it. But what if he hurts her? I'll be close, Miss Marple said, and Mrs. Price will watch. Dr. Haydock's nearby, too. We won't let her down. Eleanor returned upstairs, and Miss Marple went to the shop, where Mrs. Wicks was sweeping. Morning, Miss Marple, she said, pausing. Heard about Clara Trent. They say she's fading fast. Miss Marple leaned in, her voice low. Yes, poor dear. I heard she's changing her will, leaving everything to a charity. Harold won't get a penny. Mrs. Wicks' eyes widened. Well, that's news. He's been so attentive, you'd think he was after her money. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Some men are like that. She left, knowing Mrs. Wicks would spread the story by noon. The trap was set now. She'd watch Harold. She visited Dr. Haydock next, finding him in his office, peering at papers. Jane, that cup's got traces of something odd, he said, frowning. Not sure, yet. Could be medicine. Could be worse. I'll know by tonight. Miss Marple's heart leaped. Can you check on Clara today? She's weaker, and Harold's giving her medicine. I don't trust it. Dr. Haydock's face darkened. Sounds like John Carter's tricks. I'll go now. Say it's a routine visit. Miss Marple thanked him and headed home, her mind buzzing. The village was talking now. The baker, the postman, all whispering about Clara's will. Harold would hear soon. She thought of Mary Carter, how John had tightened his grip when her money was threatened. Harold would do the same. But this time, Miss Marple was ready. That afternoon, she returned to the inn. Sitting in the lounge with her knitting, her eyes sharp, Harold was there, laughing with guests, but his smile was tight, his eyes darting to the stairs. Eleanor came down, her face pale but firm. She caught Miss Marple's eye and nodded slightly. She'd have told Harold about the will, but Miss Marple watched as Harold's laugh faltered. He excused himself and went upstairs, his steps quick. She followed quietly, her stick silent on the carpet. At Clara's door, she heard his voice, low and sharp. Clara, what's this about a lawyer? Your will. You can't be serious. Clara's voice was weak, but Eleanor had coached her. I want to help children. It's my money, Harold. Harold's tone hardened. You're not well, darling. You're confused. Let me handle it. Miss Marple's heart raced. He was rattled, just as she'd hoped. She slipped back to the lounge, her mind clear. Harold's panic was a crack in his mask. If he tried to push more medicine, Dr. Haydock would be there. If he lashed out, Mrs. Price was watching. Dr. Haydock arrived soon after, his bag in hand. Here to check on Mrs. Trent, he told Mrs. Price, loud enough for Harold to hear. Miss Marple saw Harold's face tighten as he came downstairs, his charm slipping. She's resting, he said, his voice clipped. I'll be quick, Dr. Haydock said, brushing past. Miss Marple knitted, her eyes on Harold. He paced, his hands clenched, then went to the bar, ordering a drink. His eyes kept flicking to the stairs, and Miss Marple knew he was scared. Eleanor joined her, whispering, he's furious. Told Clara she's foolish, but she held firm. Dr. Haydock's with her now. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. Good. Keep him rattled, but stay safe. That evening, a wire came from Sir Henry. Harold's first wife suspected arsenic. No proof. Be careful. Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Arsenic like Mary Carter. The cup, the powder, it was falling into place. She wrote back. Send police. Urgent. Clara in danger. She returned to the inn, her trap tightening. Harold was in the lounge, his face pale, his charm gone. Clara was upstairs, safe with Dr. Haydock. The village buzzed with the will story, and Harold's eyes showed fear. Miss Marple's heart was steady. She'd set the trap, and he was caught. Now she needed him to act, to give her the proof to save Clara. She thought of Mary, her failure burning, but Clara's cry for help had reached her, and the village was watching. Harold's mask was cracking, and Miss Marple would break it wide open. She sat, knitting, her eyes never leaving him. The trap was set, and she'd wait for his next move. Chapter 6. The confrontation. Miss Marple's cottage glowed softly in the evening light, but her heart was a storm. The trap she'd set for Harold Trent was tightening Clara's whispered fears. The village's gossip about her will, the cup, with traces of poison, and Sir Henry's wire about arsenic all pointed to one truth. Harold was dangerous, and time was running out. Clara was still alive, unlike Mary Carter, whose memory haunted Miss Marple like a shadow. She wouldn't fail again. Tonight, she'd face Harold, force his hand, and save Clara. She sat by her fire, her notebook open, pen scratching. Harold, rattled, knows about Will. Cup shows poison. Arsenic in his past. Police coming. Confront him tonight. Her plan was risky, but clear. The village's annual tea at the hall was tonight, with everyone there: Harold, Clara, Eleanor, and half of St. Mary Mead. It was the perfect stage to push Harold into a mistake. Sir Henry had wired that police were on their way, tipped off by her urgent message. Dr. Haydock's tests on the cup and Eleanor's powder scrap were due soon. Everything was in place. Miss Marple dressed carefully, her black dress crisp, her shawl snug. Her stick felt like a sword as she stepped into the cool night, the village alive with chatter as people headed to the hall. The tea was a big event, laden with cakes, lamps glowing, and Mrs. Clement bustling about. Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her mind sharper. She'd used the crowd, the whispers, and Harold's fear to break his mask out at the hall. The air smelled of scones and tea. People laughed, clinking cups. But Miss Marple saw only Clara, pale and shaky, sitting by Harold. Eleanor hovered nearby, her face tight with worry. Dr. Haydock stood by the door, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's, a nod that said the cup's test showed arsenic, faint but real. The powder was still being checked, but it was enough. Harold was poisoning Clara, just like John Carter had poisoned Mary years ago. Miss Marple moved through the crowd, her smile gentle, her ears open. The village was buzzing about Clara's will, thanks to her whispers at the shop. Mrs. Wicks was telling the baker, Clara's giving it all to charity. Poor thing. Harold's livid. You can see it. Harold's laugh was loud, but his eyes darted, his hands restless. He knew the village was talking, and it was eating at him. She approached Eleanor, pulling her aside. Is Clara safe? She whispered. Eleanor nodded, her voice low. Dr. Haydock gave her something to counter the poison. She's weak, but holding on. Harold tried to give her more medicine, but I spilled it, like you said. Miss Marple's heart lifted. Clara was fighting, and Eleanor was brave. Good dear, stay close to her. The police are coming, and I'll handle Harold. She moved toward the Trent's table, her stick tapping softly. Mr. Trent, Mrs. Trent, she said, her voice sweet. Such a lovely evening, isn't it? Harold's smile was tight, his eyes cold. Miss Marple, always a pleasure. Clara's feeling better, aren't you, darling? Clara nodded, her hands trembling. Yes, better, she whispered, but her eyes screamed for help. Miss Marple sat, her knitting, in her lap, her voice calm but pointed. I heard you're changing your will, Clara. To a children's home, wasn't it? So generous. Harold's face froze, his cup clinking hard against the saucer. She's not well, Miss Marple. She gets confused, he said, his voice sharp. Oh, I'm sure she's clear-headed, Miss Marple said, her eyes locking on his. Money makes people nervous, doesn't it? Especially when it's slipping away. The crowd hushed nearby, sensing tension. Mrs. Clement glanced over, curious. Harold's jaw tightened, his charm cracking. What are you implying? He snapped. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft but steel. I'm saying, Mr. Trent, that Clara's illness isn't natural. I've seen it before. Charming man, a sick wife, money at stake. Like John Carter, years ago. You know of him, don't you? Harold's face paled, his hands clenching. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Miss Marple said, her eyes never leaving his. Your first wife, dead too young. Debts piling up. Now Clara, sick after your medicine. The village sees it. Harold, so do I. The hall went quiet, eyes turning. Clara's breath hitched, and Eleanor gripped her hand. Harold stood, his voice rising. You're a meddling old woman, spreading lies. Clara's fine, aren't you? Clara shook her head, tears spilling. No, Harold, I'm not. Your medicine, it's making me sick. I know it now." The crowd gasped. Harold's eyes darted. "Trapped. You're confused," he shouted, but his voice shook. "You don't know what you're saying." Miss Marple stood, her stick firm. "She knows enough. And so does Dr. Haydock. That cup you gave her. Arsenic, Mr. Trent, like your first wife. The police are coming, and they'll find the powder in your bag." Harold's face twisted, panic breaking through. "You have no proof." He spat, but his hands shook, and he stepped back, bumping the table. A cup fell, shattering, and the crowd murmured. Miss Marple pressed on, her voice steady. "No proof. The village talks. Harold, your debts, your wife's death, Clara's jewelry gone, her will pressured. You thought St. Mary Mead was blind, but we see. Like we saw John Carter. Too late for Mary. Not this time." Harold lunged forward, his voice a hiss. "You'll regret this, you old." But Dr. Haydock stepped in, his hand on Harold's arm. "Enough, Trent. The police are here." 2 officers entered, Sir Henry behind them, his face grim. Miss Marple's heart eased it. She'd timed it right. Harold froze, his eyes wild, then bolted for the door. The crowd parted, but the officers were faster, grabbing him as he shouted, "She's lying. It's all lies." Clara sobbed, Eleanor holding her. Miss Marple sat, her knitting still, her voice soft. "It's over, Clara. You're safe." Sir Henry approached, his eyes warm. "Jane, you've done it again. The cup's proof, and we'll search his bag. Arsenic, I'd bet." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy but sure. She'd faced Harold, used his fear, and broken his mask. The village watched, stunned, as the officers led him away. His shouts fading. Mrs. Wicks whispered to the baker. She saw it, just like with John Carter. Miss Marple stayed with Clara, who clung to Eleanor, her face pale but alive. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "I was so scared." Miss Marple patted her hand, her eyes kind. "You were brave, my dear. And you're free now." As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple sat back, her knitting untouched. The confrontation had worked. Harold's panic, Clara's courage, the village's eyes all came together. She thought of Mary Carter, her failure, a weight she'd carried too long. Tonight, she'd change the story. Clara would live, and Harold would pay. She walked home with Sir Henry, the night cold but clear. "You took a risk, Jane," he said. "No proof until the end." "I had to," she said softly. "For Clara. For Mary." He nodded, understanding. At her cottage, she lit the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Harold caught, arsenic found, Clara safe, village saw." Mary's shadow lighter. She closed the book, her heart steady. The confrontation was over, and justice was coming. For the first time in years, she'd sleep without Mary's ghost. Chapter 7. A satisfying resolution. The morning sun spilled through Miss Marple's cottage window, warming the room, but her heart was already light. Clara Trent was safe, Harold was in custody, and the shadow of Mary Carter's tragedy, which had haunted her for years, felt softer now. Last night's confrontation at the village tea had broken Harold's masochist panicked outburst. Clara's brave words, and the police's swift arrival, had sealed his fate. The cup's arsenic traces and Sir Henry's promise to search Harold's bag for more proof were enough to keep him locked away. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her notebook closed for once, her mind at peace. She thought of Clara's tearful thanks, Eleanor's fierce loyalty, and the village's stunned faces as Harold was dragged off. St. Mary Mead had seen the truth, just as it had with John Carter, but this time, Miss Marple had acted in time. The weight of her past failure lifted, not gone, but bearable. She stood, pinning her hat, her stick ready. Today, she'd visit Clara at the inn, check on her recovery, and tie up loose ends. The case was solved, but its echoes lingered, and she wanted to see Clara smile. Outside, the village hummed with life milk bottles, clinked, Tommy chased his dog, and Mrs. Wicks waved from the shop. "Miss Marple, you're a wonder," she called. "Caught that Trent, just like John Carter." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes warm. "The village saw it, too, Mrs. Wicks. We all did." She walked on, her heart full. St. Mary Mead's gossip had helped her trap Harold, spreading the Will story until he cracked. The village was her eyes, her ears, and now her victory. At the end, Mrs. Price greeted her, her face bright. "Clara's upstairs, Miss Marple. She's weak, but smiling. Dr. Haydock says she mend, thanks to you." Miss Marple nodded, climbing the stairs. In room 6, Clara sat by the window, her face still pale, but her eyes clear. Eleanor was beside her, holding her hand. When Clara saw Miss Marple, she stood, shaky but determined, and hugged her. "Thank you," she whispered, tears falling. "I thought I'd die, like his first wife." Miss Marple patted her back, her voice gentle. "You're stronger than you know, dear. And you had Eleanor, and the village, and me." Clara sat, wiping her eyes. "I was so scared. Harold was so kind at first, but then, the medicine, the missing jewelry, the way he watched me. I felt trapped." Miss Marple nodded, sitting beside her. "Men like Harold hide their cruelty well, but you spoke up, Clara. That took courage." Eleanor squeezed Clara's hand. "I should have seen it sooner," she said, her voice thick. "But you saved her, Miss Marple." Miss Marple shook her head. "We saved her, together. You kept her alive, Eleanor. And Mrs. Price, Dr. Haydock, Sir Henry, they all helped." Clara smiled, small but real. "What happens now?" "With Harold." Miss Marple's eyes were firm. "The police have him. The cup showed arsenic, and they found powder in his bag enough to prove he meant you harm. Sir Henry says his first wife's death will be looked at again. He won't hurt anyone else." Clara's shoulders eased, like a weight fell away. "I can go home, then, to my brother. I'll write him today, a real letter this time." Miss Marple's heart warmed. Clara was free, her spirit returning. She thought of Mary Carter, who never got this chance. This time, the story ended right. They talked a while longer, Clara's voice growing stronger. She spoke of her plans to sell her jewelry, give some to charity for real, and start fresh. Eleanor promised to stay with her, her loyalty fierce. Miss Marple listened, her knitting in her lap, her heart full. This was why she watched, why she listened to see light return to eyes like Clara's dot. As she left, Mrs. Price stopped her at the door. "The village is talking, Miss Marple. They're calling you a hero." Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Nonsense. I'm just an old woman who notices things. Keep an eye on Clara, will you?" Mrs. Price nodded, her face proud. Miss Marple walked home, the sun high now. The village felt alive, its chatter a song of triumph. At the shop, Mrs. Wicks was telling the baker. Miss Marple saw it from the start, just like with John Carter. The baker nodded, and Miss Marple smiled, passing by. St. Mary Mead had its hero, but she knew the truth. They'd all saved Clara, in their way. Back home, a letter waited from Sir Henry. Harold's confessing, Jane, arsenic in his bag, linked to Clara's illness. First wife's case reopened. "You've done it again." Miss Marple tucked it away, her heart steady. Justice was coming, not just for Clara, but for Harold's first wife, and maybe for Mary Carter, too. That evening, her nephew Raymond West arrived, his city suit out of place in the cozy cottage. "Aunt Jane, the village is buzzing," he said, grinning. "You've caught another villain. Tell me everything." Miss Marple poured tea, her voice soft. "It's not about catching, Raymond, it's about seeing." Clara was scared, like someone I knew long ago. I couldn't save her then, but I could save Clara now. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes wide. "How do you do it? Spot the bad ones." She smiled, her knitting clicking. "People are the same, everywhere. In St. Mary Mead, in London, in Harold's heart. I watch, I listen, and I remember." Clara's fear was like Mary's. "Years ago, I saw the pattern, and I acted." Raymond shook his head, amazed. "You're sharper than any detective." Miss Marple chuckled. "I'm just an old woman with time to think. Now, tell me about your book." They talked late, the fire crackling. Raymond's stories of London faded as Miss Marple's mind drifted to Clara, now safe, and Mary, whose ghost was quieter tonight. The case had been hard. its echoes painful, but the resolution was sweet. Clara would live, Harold would pay, and St. Mary Mead had closed ranks around one of its own. As Raymond left, promising to visit soon, Miss Marple stood by her window, the village dark and still. She thought of the vicarage tea, the inn's dim room, Harold's cold eyes. She'd faced them all, and won. The memory of Mary Carter, whose death had haunted her, was softer now, overlaid with Clara's living face. She opened her notebook one last time, her pen steady. Clara safe, Harold caught, arsenic proven, village united, Mary's memory honored. She closed it, her heart at rest. The case that haunted her had found its end, not in sorrow, but in hope. Clara's courage, Eleanor's loyalty. The village's eyes, they'd all made it right. Miss Marple turned out the lamp, the cottage quiet. Outside, St. Mary Mead slept, its secrets safe with her. She climbed the stairs, her step light, for the first time in years, she'd sleep without shadows, knowing she'd changed the story. Clara was free, and Miss Marple's heart was, too.